we're going to cover our monitors, but need to make sure no monitor is visible to the public. So we're just concerned about it. It's
Yes, sir.
the kind of thing you don't want to see replicated somewhere else.
Yes, sir.
That'll be it, Your Honor.
Okay, very good. You may bring the jury.
The jury is present, sir.
Very good, thank you. Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Agent Zapata.
Good afternoon.
We've gone through a pretty long list of things that you did analysis on. Did you do any analysis on any clothing or anything from the victims' bodies other than Maggie Murdaugh's fingernail clippings?
I analyzed Margaret Murdaugh's fingernail clippings, Paul Murdaugh's fingernail clippings, as well as their buccal swabs.
And when you say they're buccal swabs, that was simply to collect their DNA to perform analysis, is that correct?
That was the known standard that I used to make comparisons, yes.
And under Maggie Murdaugh's left fingernail clippings, you found unidentified male DNA?
Foreign to Margaret Murdaugh, there were some alleles present, yes.
When we say some alleles present, was there DNA from an unrelated male under her fingernails?
For item 70, yes, one of the alleles indicates a male contributor.
And this was an unrelated male?
Do you mean unrelated as in unrelated?
Well, let me strike that and rephrase. Were Paul and Alex Murdaugh excluded as contributors?
Yes.
So male DNA under her fingernails, not from Paul, not from Alex Murdaugh.
The foreign DNA to her, yes, they were excluded as contributors.
Would it have been possible to perform any further analysis on this, a Y chromosome profile?
It is possible, but because there were so many male individuals who were related to each other as standards that were submitted, it was decided that that would not be the best course of action to continue analysis, because the male, the Y chromosome testing that you're discussing is inherited along the males of a familial line, and so there will be no way to distinguish between any related people, any related males.
When, I guess, making this determination, were you all aware, as you've had previous testimony, that Maggie Murdaugh had been to a nail salon late that afternoon?
I did not have any information about that, no.
So if her nails were quite clean coming to Moselle, she doesn't have a lot of opportunity to have contact with unrelated males.
Overrule the objection.
So if her nails were clean coming to Moselle, it doesn't appear that she has much opportunity to have that kind of contact with unrelated males, does it?
It could be DNA, DNA under fingernails. You're picking up DNA anytime you touch an item, potentially. If she did get her nails done, it's possible that somewhere at the nail salon there was DNA that she picked up under her fingernails. We can't really tell you how or when the DNA got there, but at any point in time between getting her nails done and arriving home, she could touch an object, and potentially DNA from that object could be under her fingernails, or she can touch an individual and their DNA be under her fingernails in that way.
Are you familiar with something called CODIS?
Yes.
And what is CODIS?
CODIS is a database that we use to enter unknown profiles from a crime to attempt to identify links between different cases and also between individuals who maybe have been arrested or convicted of a crime.
So it's a database that you can submit DNA samples to and see if you get a hit and can identify whose DNA it is.
Correct.
Was this unidentified unknown male DNA found under Maggie Murdaugh's fingernails submitted to CODIS?
It was not, because, like we explained earlier, there were only 3 alleles present that were foreign to her, and that does not meet the threshold of information necessary to enter a profile into CODIS.
And it was decided not to do this further Y chromosome analysis on it?
Correct.
Is it unusual in your experience to not test the victim's clothing for DNA?
It depends on the situation of the case.
A situation where an unknown person has killed 2 people in close point-blank shootings?
It would depend on the question that you're trying to answer when you are processing the clothing. Typically, victims of gunshot wounds, their clothing will be saturated in their blood, or there'll be lots of their blood present. And so if you're looking for touch DNA from maybe an individual, we would need to know the specific area of interest to attempt to gather that touch DNA from, because the potential blood from the victims would be on the clothing. So we need to be able to isolate a specific area. If that information is not known, then there's not very much that we can do with that clothing, because there's just no specified area for us to test.
What about their hands? Wouldn't their hands always be an area of interest?
Again, it depends. If there is evidence of a struggle, then perhaps, which is why we would take the fingernail clippings. If you don't know, then sometimes you take the fingernail clippings just to see if you can get some DNA from the fingernail clippings. But
and the one time something was taken from them, it revealed unknown, unidentifiable male DNA.
a very partial low-level profile, foreign to Margaret.
And you found Maggie Murdaugh's DNA on the 300 blackout shell casings that were recovered, is that correct?
Are you referring to item 7.1?
Yes.
She was included as a contributor to that item, yes.
And your report doesn't separate between individual shell casings, does it?
No.
And is your report consistent with one of those shell casings being found in physical contact with her body?
I believe there was information from the crime scene that one of the shell casings was recovered from underneath her body.
And is your report consistent with that DNA could be transferred by physical contact?
That's possible, yes.
And for the shot shells found in the feed room that had a presumptive blood test positive, you found Paul's DNA on those, is that correct?
Paul was included as a contributor to that item, yes, 10.1.
And is that consistent with those being found in a room soaked with his blood?
It would not be unexpected.
And for the steering wheel of the Chevy Suburban, there was a positive human blood test, and I believe you found Maggie and Alex Murdaugh's DNA on the steering wheel.
For item 56?
Yes.
For item 56, which was a mixture, was interpreted as a mixture originating from two individuals, both Margaret and Richard Alexander Murdaugh were included as contributors.
So, yes.
They were included as contributors.
Yes. And is that consistent with someone who has handled Margaret Murdaugh's deceased body, which is unfortunately covered in blood, and then driving the vehicle?
I can't ever tell you exactly how the DNA was deposited onto an item. I can just tell you what the DNA profile is.
And I'm not asking you to, I'm just asking, is it consistent? Is there anything in your report that would exclude that explanation?
It's a possibility.
And for the two shotguns, neither one of those had Paul's DNA, is that correct?
Can you give me an item number,
I
please?
can. Sorry, just a sec. The first one is item 15.
Item 15 were swabs from the Camo Benelli 12-gauge shotgun from receiver forward of the loading port, and Paul Murdaugh was excluded as a contributor to that item.
And the other shotgun was item 22.
For 22.4, which was interpreted as a mixture originating from two individuals, Paul Murdaugh was excluded as a contributor. For item 22.5, due to the relatedness of the contributors, I was not able to offer a conclusion regarding Paul Murdaugh. So that's a situation that we talked about earlier, where sometimes if there's a small amount of DNA present, we cannot distinguish between related individuals, and so I was not able to make any comparisons to Paul to that item.
But you're not able to say for either one of those shotguns that Paul's DNA was detected?
He was excluded as a contributor for 22.4. For 22.5, I couldn't make any comparisons to him either way.
And again, is there anything in your test results that would be inconsistent with somebody who, with Alex Murdaugh, having Maggie Murdaugh's blood on his hands, having just visited the crime scene, and handling those two weapons?
Again, I can't really say exactly how the DNA was deposited onto an item.
And then later you did some DNA testing on the white T-shirt he was wearing, correct?
Yes.
Did anyone ever tell you why you were being asked to perform those tests
Which tests do you mean?
on his white T-shirt?
The DNA analysis on the
So
T-shirt?
the DNA one. DNA.
It was submitted with a request to, for DNA for blood, and so when items come in with a request for DNA blood, we will test it. If it is presumptive positive, then we'll move forward with DNA analysis on that item.
So did anyone say we believe he's wearing this shirt that night? Is that why you're testing it for blood? Just to see if that, right? Someone's asking you to do this work. Did anyone say, we think he was wearing this shirt that night during these murders, let's test it for DNA and for blood?
I know that the shirt was removed from his body when it was collected. As far as when he was wearing the shirt, I don't have any information about that.
We pull up what's been previously admitted as the Defense Exhibit 32. Okay. You recognize this, correct?
Yes.
And this shows where the cuttings were made from the shirt, right? The A, B, C, D, E.
Yes.
And just kind of going through very quickly, cutting A down here in the bottom, did you find Maggie or Paul's DNA in cutting A?
Cutting A is item 19.4.
Yes.
For 19.4, Margaret Murdaugh was excluded as a contributor, and Paul Murdaugh was included as a contributor.
So we have Paul in A. In B, did you find Maggie or Paul?
For item 19.5, Paul was excluded as a contributor, and Margaret Murdaugh was included as a contributor.
And for C, which is going up a bit, so now we're off the bottom of the shirt, did you find Maggie or Paul?
For item 19.6, again, I was not able to make any comparisons to Paul due to the relatedness of the contributors, but Margaret was included as a contributor to that mixture.
Okay. For cutting D, now we're up at the right shoulder. Did you find Maggie or Paul there?
For item 19.7, I could not make any comparisons to Paul due to the relatedness of the contributors, and Margaret was included as a contributor to the mixture.
Did you also find Nolan Tootin in D?
He was also included as a contributor to the mixture.
Going over to the other shoulder, did you find Maggie or Paul in E?
For 19.8, Paul Murdaugh was excluded as a contributor. And Margaret Murdaugh was included as a contributor to the mixture.
Okay. So no Paul but Maggie there. Now coming down all the way to the bottom, G. Did you find Maggie or Paul there?
Paul was excluded as a contributor to the mixture.
Now finally, for both F and H up here, did you get any results for either one of those?
For 19.10, Margaret was also included as a contributor. Sorry, just to finish that result.
Sorry.
You were asking about?
F and H, did you get any results for either one of those?
For F, which was our item 19.9, a DNA profile was developed, but due to the inability to determine the number of contributors, no further interpretation will be offered. For H, which is our item 19.11, Paul was excluded as a contributor. And for Margaret, The comparison to Margaret, an uninformative statistical result was obtained. No conclusion can be made regarding Margaret Murdaugh as a possible contributor to the mixture under the listed propositions, which in this case the propositions were Richard Alexander Murdaugh and Margaret Murdaugh contributed to the mixture versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh and an unidentified, unrelated individual contributed to the mixture. And that's a situation I described earlier where the seesaw is balanced, so it can't tell me in either direction which scenario is a better explanation of the DNA profile.
So the only part of the shirt that we see right here in the front where you can say that you did find Paul's DNA is down here at A, the bottom right part of the shirt, correct? Don't see.
For item A, I did have an inclusionary likelihood ratio for Paul. For several of the other stains, there was, I could not distinguish between him and other related individuals, so I could not make comparisons to him.
But the only place you definitely did find Paul was A, is that correct? On the front of the shirt.
That was the only item where there was an inclusionary likelihood ratio for Paul.
Do you remember when you did these, when you reported these DNA results? Do you know the date?
Are you asking specifically for
Yeah, the date that you reported your results for the shirt, for DNA.
For the shirt? There were two reports that had the shirt because there were two times that it was processed originally. The first report, which had the results for item 19.2, was June 25th, 2021. And then the second report was originally issued July 25th, 2021.
July 25th, 2021. On July 26th, the day after, did you attend a meeting with President was Major Huey? I apologize if I'm not saying the names correctly. Captain Riley, Captain Reinhardt, Lieutenant Wallace, Lieutenant Schenck, Lieutenant Hash, yourself, and Mindy Worley. Did you attend that meeting?
Yes, I did.
And was the purpose of that meeting to discuss the DNA report?
Yes, it was to explain the results of my report.
Were you at that meeting asked to perform hemotrace tests?
Not at that meeting, no.
Okay. When were you asked to perform hemotrace tests on the shirt?
On August 10th, 2021.
And is that the day that you performed them?
Yes,
And I think you previously testified your test results were negative.
correct.
Tell us a little more how you did. Well, let me ask it this way. To perform the test, did you make smaller cuttings from the larger shirt cuttings?
Yes, so I took the cuttings, opened them, and then cut small portions of the larger cuttings to test for hemotrace, and then place those cuttings into a solution, and then that solution is added to each individual card for that individual cutting. So there's a test performed for each item.
Show you a series of photos, if I may, and ask if you can identify them. This is what's been previously marked, and the marks are on the back. It can be confusing. As Defense Exhibit 96, do you recognize that? I apologize. So do you recognize the photograph?
Yes.
And that's one of the cuttings after you made the small cuttings?
Can I see the other? It's hard to tell which was before and which was after without the other cuttings, because there's cuttings for DNA, and then I cut along the cuttings for DNA for the hemotrace test.
Yeah, I don't have before and afters to show you. Would it perhaps be helpful to look at some of the other ones? Would that help you?
Yes.
I'll show you what's been marked. I'm going to read these off, and so I can give them all to you at one time, if that's okay. It might help you.
Yes.
Been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 97. '98. '99.
There's also still one over there.
100. 101. 102. 103. 104. 105. I believe this is the last one. And I'll go get the other one. It's over there. We only have this is the second copy. So now that you have them all, do you recognize them?
Yes.
And these are the larger cuttings with the smaller cuttings made after the hemotrace test.
I know that we took photos before the cutting was taken for hemotrace and after. It's hard to tell from these pictures if it was before or after, but they were taken during the hemotrace processing of the shirt.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would offer Defendant's Exhibits 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105 as evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
They're admitted without objection.
Permission to publish. May I publish?
You don't need my permission to publish anything that's in evidence.
Can we bring up the first one? And go get the whiteboard, please. Be sure it doesn't blow up the TV. So in this one, it looks like you made 5 cuttings, is that correct?
So some of these cuttings were originally taken for DNA. I tried when I cut for hemotrace to also cut along where the cuttings were taken for DNA.
Okay, but there's 5 there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. The next one? And let's see if we can count how many are here. Were you able to count how many?
It looks like 14. It's a little hard to see the very small ones. It's hard to tell.
Okay, be
On the small
conservative.
screen.
If you're not sure, don't count it. So 14? No, don't do that.
It looks like 14.
Okay. Next exhibit. And here.
Eight.
Okay. Next one.
Seven.
Okay. Next.
Nine.
The next one.
Seven.
7. Next exhibit.
Looks like 9. Again, it's a little hard to see.
Again, be conservative. Don't count one if you're not sure. The next exhibit.
4.
Next one.
Nine.
Next one.
Two.
That's it. Those are all of them. So now we'll just add these numbers up. I have a calculator which will help. So we have 5 plus 14 plus 8 plus 2 plus 7 plus 9 plus 7 plus 9 plus 4 plus 9. So what's the total?
74.
74. And in your test, on none of these did you detect human blood with hemotrace. Is that correct?
For all those cuttings for the different items, they were all put together into that tube for that item, and for all of those tests, the result was negative.
So we're 0 for 74 detecting human blood here.
The result was negative.
Moving on, then on August 16th, did you attend a meeting to discuss DNA results or outstanding DNA reports? Were these results discussed at that meeting?
For that meeting, we were discussing the items that were, that still had pending DNA assignment, so that they had submitted for DNA analysis, and we were waiting to see if that analysis was still required. There's nothing in the discussion about those results being discussed. I don't remember anything else about that meeting.
Let me ask this, who asked you to perform the hemotrace test on August 10th?
There was the request for the hemotrace result was relayed to me by my supervisor,
And who's your supervisor?
Lieutenant Laura Hash.
And on August 10th, did you relay to Lieutenant Hash the results of your tests?
She was actually the reviewer of my hemotrace test, so when we perform card tests, there needs to be a second analyst to review the card test and sign off on the review of the test. So she was present when the test was performed.
In 2021, were you ever informed that SLED was seeking a blood spatter analysis of the shirt?
I was told after the shirt had been sent that it was going to be sent for blood spatter analysis, but I don't know anything about how that came about or where it was being sent to. That was once I was done with my analysis.
When you say after the shirt was sent, what do you mean by that?
Or however they did the blood spatter analysis. I know that there is documentation that the shirt was being taken for that in the narrative, but I don't know how that came about.
And at that time, I guess I'm a little confused, were you aware at that time that it was being sent for blood spatter analysis?
Not until it was already sent.
And by sent, you mean that somebody had asked for the report to be made, or that the shirt had physically been sent somewhere?
I don't know anything about how the blood spatter analysis came to be. I don't know what they required for that analysis.
Could you just tell me a date the first time you learned that there was going to be a blood spatter analysis? Even a month, if you don't know the exact date.
I really don't know because it didn't have anything to do with me or my analysis.
When was the first time your hemotrace test appeared on a report that you issued?
The report with the hemotrace results was issued on November 10th, 2021.
Were the results for the blue raincoat also on that report?
Yes, they were.
Did you discuss the hemotrace test results with anyone working on this case?
I don't think that I discussed it with anybody else. I don't think so. I would have discussed it with the person who reviewed the results.
Did you discuss the blue raincoat results with anyone investigating the case, any agents on the investigative side?
I know for the raincoat, I was asked to give an update on when the results would be issued. Once I developed the DNA profiles for those items, the DNA profiles were technically reviewed, and then I was able to make a phone call to relay those results. And I was able to speak to Agent Gent and just give him the preliminary results for the items from the raincoat.
But you did not discuss the hemotrace results that are on the same report?
According to my notes, I only updated him on the findings from the rain code.
Let's move ahead then to March 22nd of 2022. You just said that you were aware at some point that a blood spatter report had been requested. Were you aware in March that one had been received claiming that there was high-velocity impacts blood spatter on the shirt? Were you aware of that report?
I didn't really know anything about the report or the results of the report.
So you weren't aware of it in March 2022, is that correct?
I don't know when. I really do not remember when I was told or what. I know that I didn't really get much information about the report or when.
Okay. Well, moving a little further then, on April 11, 2022, the Attorney General requested a meeting that occurred on April 20th, 9 days later, to discuss reports.
Yes.
And in preparing for that meeting on the 20th, did you access your November 10 report on April 18 and April 19, a couple days before that meeting?
I mean, did I look at the report in preparation
Yes.
for the meeting? I would have reviewed the reports in preparation for the meeting, yes.
At that meeting, was there any discussion of blood spatter?
I do not remember.
Okay, this is the first meeting with the AG's office after the report is received saying that there is blood spatter. Was it
But that had
discussed?
nothing to do with my testing, so I don't really know.
Did you notice that 6 days after that meeting, there were media reports that high-velocity impact spatter had been found in Mr. Murdaugh's T-shirt?
I tried very hard to not look at any media reports involving this case at all, so I tried to avoid that information.
Well, at some point, did someone come to you and ask about the hemotrace test results that you performed that say no human blood, 0 for 74, in relation to this report saying that there was blood spatter that had to come from a gunshot on the T-shirt?
At some point, I know that we discussed the hemotrace results on the shirt.
And when was that?
It probably would have been in the meeting where we went over all of the results of my reports. I know that we had several meetings to discuss the results of my reports.
Any idea when that was?
It does appear that that April meeting was the first meeting after that report was issued, where we had a discussion about the reports.
So it would have been that meeting that had been discussed, the hemotrace test results and the blood spatter report discussed in the same meeting?
Possibly, but I don't know that, I also wasn't present for all of the meetings all of the time. I know there were some times when there were meetings with specific individuals first, and then I would come later, so I don't remember if there was specific discussion of blood spatter there when I was present.
Handing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 95, do you recognize that?
Yes. It is a memorandum to the file for this case.
And you're the author of this memorandum?
Yes.
And it concerns hemotrace and it relates to this case?
Yes, I was asked to do some research into the scientific literature to see if there was information about hemotrace and potential effects of other kinds of testing prior to hemotrace, as well as list some reasons for possible negative hemotrace results.
Your Honor, I would offer a Defendant's Exhibit 95 into evidence.
Says the state.
No objection, Your Honor.
Submitted without objection.
Were you asked to write this memo?
Yes.
Who asked you to do this?
Creighton Waters asked for me to do this research and then summarize my findings in the form of a memo.
Did he tell you why he was asking you to do this?
Because there were negative hemotrace results in this case from the shirt, he wanted just some more information on negative hemotrace results.
Was it specifically because of the report saying high-velocity impact spatter?
I don't know that.
Was that discussed when he asked you to do this?
We discussed the negative hemotrace results on the shirt.
Did you discuss a report by a man named Tom Devil?
I don't think we specifically discussed the results of that report because I don't know, I'm not a blood spatter expert. I don't know anything about what that report would say or what the findings in that report would mean. I just know that there was a report, and then I was asked to give some more information on hemotrace.
Were you aware of a report by Tom Devil specifically regarding use of hemotrace on things had been previously tested with LCB?
I was made aware of a report like that after I had already, obviously it was after my analysis had been complete. I don't remember specifically if it was before or after I was asked to write this memo.
And you attached some articles to this memo, correct?
Yes, I attached the articles that I found regarding hemotrace so that all that information would be present in the memo.
And this first article from the Australian Journal of Forensic Sciences, am I characterizing it correctly to say that it reports that hemotrace tests are generally effective after treatment with LCB?
For that article, there were many tests performed comparing testing hemotrace after the use of several other kinds of tests beforehand. Their results were positive following LCV for 17 out of 17 tests with a blood dilution of 1 to 10, and for 16 out of 18 tests with a blood dilution of 1 to 100.
So it usually works, hemotrace, when you're testing something that had a presumptive test with LCB, correct?
Right, it shows that it did work the majority of the time that they tested it, but they did obtain 2 negative results as well.
Out of how many total?
Out of 17 plus 18.
Okay. So it did work 2 out of 18 times?
Turn this on. Of the 35 times they tested it, they obtained a positive result 33% of the time, according to the article.
Sorry.
33 times, sorry,
So
according to the
since you have a
article.
calculator, what's the percentage of that?
It looks like 94%.
94%. And here we're at 0 for 74. On the next article, on page 4 of the next article, there's a little chart. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Which article?
In the exhibit, the second article, page 4.
Page 28. Okay,
Next one. Next
the
page.
next one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I reading this chart correctly to understand it to mean that Hemotrace detects blood at dilution levels in which LCV would not detect blood?
According to this study, which was performed by the Michigan State Police, they were able to obtain positive Hemotrace results for some samples that were negative LCV.
So the Hemotrace test is more sensitive than LCV, at least according to this study, correct?
It appears to be. According to this study, LCV is not a chemical that I use in the DNA casework department. It is a test that's performed by the crime scene unit, so they would be the best people to answer questions about sensitivity of that test.
But according to this, you would get a positive result even if you couldn't see anything with LCV. According to the previous study, after LCV, 94%, and here we're 0 for 74. Is it fair to say that there's no human blood on the T-shirt?
Like I said earlier, the test that I performed was negative for the presence of human blood.
Quick pull up 32 again. This will be very quick. Zoom in on the pocket. Sorry, I don't have an image of the back of it, but I believe this is the name of a fishing boat, and there's a fishing boat on the back of the T-shirt. Were you aware when doing this, that this is a fishing T-shirt?
No,
Have you ever gaffed a fish?
I don't even know what that word means, no.
Well, let me ask it this way then. If someone were doing something while wearing this T-shirt that would cause non-human blood to spray onto the shirt, could that be a reason why something would have a misting pattern with LCV and test negative for Hemotrace, 0 for 74?
I can't really answer anything about the misting pattern because that is not my area of expertise, but one possibility for a negative Hemotrace test is that the blood present on the item is not human blood, because Hemotrace is a confirmatory test for the presence of human blood. It also reacts to ferret blood and higher primate blood.
Does it react to fish blood, does it?
No.
Did you attend an evidence viewing meeting on January 5th of this year?
Yes, I did.
Was blood spatter discussed at that meeting?
I know that we talked about the results of the shirt. As far as blood spatter, again, I'm not a blood spatter analyst, so I cannot give any information about blood spatter on an item of clothing or on anything.
Specifically, were reports by Tom Bevel discussed at that meeting?
I really do not recall.
Even though it was just this month, well, last month, time's flying.
Yeah, it's hard to remember specifics.
Reports by a Deputy Kinsey discussed regarding blood spatter.
I don't recall that name at all.
Was the T-shirt discussed?
I don't remember the exact items that were discussed specifically.
Has anyone, how do I ask this? It looks like there's been a lot of work done on this T-shirt,
Yes,
and that's fair, right?
yes,
Put a lot of work into this T-shirt. There were the little cuttings in the beginning, the small ones in the hem, right? And then those are tested with
phenolphthalein.
right? And then DNA tested. All of these large cuttings, we haven't even gone over, there were a couple in the back of the shirt as well. Of these small cuttings, then you went back and made more small cuttings for the hemotrace, right? Lots of work, and then you're doing this big memo about hemotrace because of the shirt, right? A lot of work, and this is going on from a period of June 21, the month of the murders. It looks like all the way up until a month before trial. Is that fair?
Well, my analysis was complete before that, but
But I mean, you're doing this memo to file because of the shirt results, correct?
yes, correct.
So I mean, it's, so for all this work on this shirt, it appears that the theory was that he was wearing that shirt that night.
Sustained.
Just ask maybe this, the meetings that you've attended where the shirt was discussed, blood spatter was perhaps discussed, was there ever any discussion of a blue button-down shirt?
Not that I recall.
Never discussed? Okay. Read the court's indulgence. I know you said it's not your area, but are you familiar with the term high-velocity impact spatter?
Not really.
You even know what that is?
No, I'm not a blood spatter expert.
Would you think that you could have blood spatter without blood? No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
When you analyze something, do you try to be thorough in your analysis?
Yes, I do.
And are you aware that before you analyzed this shirt that there were presumptive positives for blood?
Yes.
Okay. And then when you analyzed the shirt with the hemotrace, what were your findings?
The hemotrace results were negative.
All right. The defense also asked you about touch DNA. When you analyzed those cases and shot shells that were found at the scene, what were you analyzing those items for?
For item 7.1, the request was for touch DNA analysis. For items 9 and 10, the request was also for touch DNA analysis, but because there was staining on the swabs when Rachel Wynn did her processing, she presumptively tested those swabs, and they were presumptively positive for blood, and so they were forwarded for DNA analysis.
But for touch DNA on items like that, would you be looking for possibly whoever loaded those items into a gun?
Leave it with us.
Whose other DNA could you be looking for when you're analyzing those cases for DNA?
Typically, when cartridge cases or shotgun shells are submitted for touch DNA, we are looking for DNA of an individual who may have handled those cartridge cases or shotgun shells.
And is it common to find touch DNA on fired cases or shot shells?
In my experience, there's not been a very good yield of DNA on those items. From my understanding, when a bullet is fired, it is being put through a lot of intense heat as it's moving through the firearm. At least that's how firearms analysts seem to explain the process. And so the heat can affect the recovery of DNA from that item.
And also with touch DNA, do you know when touch DNA gets somewhere?
No, I can never say how or when DNA was deposited on an item.
So if I shook somebody's hand at some point in the day, could I have their DNA on my hand?
It's possible, yes.
And you would know when that got there?
No.
Now, do you determine what evidence is analyzed in a case? Do you look at all the evidence and pick and choose what you're going to analyze?
No, we are requested to analyze items of evidence.
So some requests for you to analyze evidence.
Correct.
Who ever requested for you to analyze the clothes of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh?
I was never requested to analyze those items.
And do you analyze items that you have not been requested to analyze?
No.
Thank you.
Very briefly, Your Honor. You were asked about touch DNA. Is it common to find touch DNA on an object when that object is discovered touching a person?
Can you repeat that question?
If an object is found actually touching a deceased person, would it be uncommon to find that deceased person's touch DNA on that object?
No.
And would it be uncommon to find a wife's touch DNA on a husband's shirt?
It would not be uncommon, no.
No further questions.
Step down. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to the jury room for a break. Please do not discuss the case.
May now be seated.
Whatever we put the envelope for, we put on the screen, shown here somewhere.
Yes, sir.
No, you turn it this way though, please. Proceed, Your Honor. Sir?
Thank you. Your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Ellen Reamer.
Hold a moment, ma'am. Ma'am. You witness, right? Raise your right hand. Left hand on the Bible. Do you affirm the testimony like a given share of this trial shall be the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Take a seat in the witness stand. Adjust the microphone if you have to. State your name again for the record. Spell your last name.
Yes. Hi, my name is Dr. Ellen Reamer, R-I-E-M-E-R.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and get right to it. And if you would, just tell the jury a little bit about your education that led up to you becoming a physician, please.
Yes, okay. Well, I graduated from medical school in 1997 with a Doctor of Medicine degree. Following that, I did a residency in pathology at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia University Medical Center in the city of New York. Following that, I did a forensic pathology fellowship at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of the state of Maryland. Following that, I did an additional fellowship training year at Johns Hopkins Hospital, Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, also in Baltimore. And I am board certified in forensic pathology and anatomic pathology. After I completed all my education and fellowship training, I took my first job as a forensic pathologist at Wake Forest University Baptist Medical Center, Wake Forest University School of Medicine in North Carolina, where I remained for almost 6 years, but before being recruited by the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, where I've been for 14 years as a forensic pathologist.
All right, and at the Medical University of South Carolina, you said you're a forensic pathologist. Do you have any professorship or teaching responsibilities there?
Yes, so I have also the title of Professor of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine, and because Medical University of South Carolina is a teaching institution, I am responsible for educating physicians in training as well as medical students, and that's an integral part of my job. So a lot of the work I do is observed by students and trainees.
And you mentioned you had some board certifications. Can you tell those to the jury, please?
Yes, so you know, in order for somebody, there's the American Board of Pathology is the organization that certifies specialists in different fields, and well, the American Board of Pathology certifies specialists in pathology and requires them to take very long examinations and demonstrate and pass those examinations, and you can't just sit down and take them. You have to have achieved, gotten through your residency training and fellowship training as well. So I managed to do all of that, and I'm board certified in forensic pathology. Yes.
And do you have any membership or involvement in any professional societies that are relevant to what we're talking about here today?
Yes, well, I'm a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and I also am responsible for editing journals. I have various academic responsibilities as well.
All right, and you mentioned editing certain journals. Have you published in the field of pathology over the years, given your professorships and your educational
Yes.
expertise?
Because I'm interested in, educating the medical community, I published close to, I don't remember the exact number, but approximately 30 publications in the fields of pathology and forensic pathology. And this is also something that's valued at an academic institution, so you're not just practicing, but also contributing to the body of knowledge in your field.
Over the years with this experience, have you had called to conduct a number of autopsies?
Yes, so the principal responsibility of my work is to perform autopsies on deceased individuals in order to determine the cause and manner of death. And over the course of my career, don't keep exact track, but I estimate that I've done approximately 5,500 autopsies.
5,500?
Correct.
All right, and we'll talk more about what an autopsy is in a minute. Over that course of time doing 5,500 autopsies, have you been qualified as an expert and testified in courts of record in the nation?
Yes. So again, I'm not keeping track of every single one, but a conservative estimate would be approximately once a month for more than 20 years, which would put me in the mid 200s, so about 250, but that's probably a little bit more than that.
And that's times you've been qualified as an expert in forensic pathology?
Yes.
And is that just in South Carolina, or have there been other places? As well?
Yeah, the majority have been in South Carolina, but also North Carolina, where I practiced for 6 years prior to moving to South Carolina. And I've also been admitted as an expert witness in forensic pathology in federal court a couple of times, where I autopsied individuals who died on tribal lands.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to qualify Dr. Reamer, Professor Reamer, as an expert in forensic pathology.
No objection, Your Honor.
She's so qualified.
All right, Dr. Reamer, before we get to your specific findings in this case, can you quickly describe to the jury what is pathology and what is an autopsy? What is it that your science and being a physician, what are you trying to do?
Yes, so the purpose of an autopsy is to obtain as much information as I can from examination of the tissues of the body in order to come to a determination of the cause and manner of death. And the autopsy examination is basically a specialized surgical procedure. It starts with an external examination, so before any cuttings get started, I look from head to toe. I look for anything unusual. If there's injuries, I review them. I look at them carefully and document those findings, as well as establish an opinion on how injuries may have occurred.
And obviously, because in cases where you have traumatic injury, there's no getting around the fact that it's very graphic, the things that you have to look at and the things here today that you have to describe to the jury.
Yes, that's just part of it.
Did you have call in this particular case to examine the victims of these murders, Paul Murdaugh and Maggie Murdaugh?
Yes, I have the name is Margaret Murdaugh. I know she goes by Maggie, but Margaret Murdaugh as well as Paul Murdaugh. I performed the autopsies on both of these individuals.
All right. And do you recall what day that was?
I'll have to refer to my notes. Both of the autopsies on both Paul and Maggie were performed by me on June 10th, 2021.
And is it typical when you're conducting an autopsy that you have assistants there that assist you in performing these procedures and that sort of thing?
Yes, so I have assistants to help me with whatever I need, and the autopsies, I do the autopsy, and any assistance I need is done under my direction.
Sure. And then is it common that photographs are taken of the various injuries and your various findings as you do the autopsy?
Yes.
All right. And if any physical evidence is recovered during that autopsy, is law enforcement present or some official there to take custody of those sorts of things?
They're not always present, but if they're not present at the day of the autopsy, they'll come back, and I seal all of the evidence up and with in secure bags, and then those are transferred to the appropriate investigator.
Well, let's go ahead and get to it, and we're going to talk about Paul Murdaugh first, okay?
Okay.
And we also, do we have some poster boards behind you? And the first one is marked as States 500. And can you explain very quickly what this is to the jury, please?
Okay. So you may have seen these kinds of diagrams. These are blank body diagrams, and so when I autopsy a man or male, I start with that diagram, and it's basically a vehicle for me to take notes during the autopsy, so I can incorporate findings into my final autopsy report. But this is not, something that, this is really for my edification, and so I can write things down, and it helps me when I write the autopsy report to make sure I've covered everything.
And will this assist you as you explain to the jury the injuries that the two victims suffered?
Yes.
Dr. Reamer, let's again Starting with Paul, if you could very quickly, how many, did you observe any gunshot wounds to Paul?
Well, actually, there were 2 shotgun wounds, so that's different than a handgun or, so a shotgun is where there, there's basically pellets that are enclosed in a wadding, and the wadding, after it's fired from the shotgun, kind of opens up and allows all these pellets to be released from the wadding. And so the features of his injuries told me in no uncertain terms that he was shot with a shotgun.
And if I could ask you with the court's permission, if you could step down, I'm going to hold up this board, and if you could bring a marker with you, I've got a red Sharpie right here if that helps you. And let's talk about the injuries that you observed to Paul Murdaugh, and then if you could, for the jury, if you could draw on this board that the first shotgun wound that you observed on Paul.
I'll use my markers.
All right, let me put mine up real quick.
Okay. Okay, so in order to make things as clear to you as possible, I'm going to use a black marker for an entrance wound and red for exit, okay? So just arbitrarily. Okay, so Paul had 2 shotgun wounds. One of them was to the left side of the chest, approximately this location. And the wadding containing the pellets traveled beneath the skin through like the soft tissue of the left side of the chest. It didn't actually go into the chest cavity, but traveled beneath the skin and through the muscle and fat before exiting the left axillary region. Okay, so it's kind of a straight, kind of left to right, right to left shot. And
just real quick, when you say right to left, you're talking about Paul's right to
yeah,
left.
that's right. So I'm always thinking about like the patient's right to left. Okay, it's not, if we look at it, it's from, would be from left to right. But we always, for consistency, it's always relative to his body.
Down here by the hands, could you put an R on one side and an L on the other, just because I know I get confused?
Yeah, no, it is. And honestly, we all do this during autopsies as well, because especially we have the back, and it's very easy to make a mistake.
And also, just real quick, could you write Paul up at the top there? All right, thank you. All right.
Okay.
All right, so you were talking about that first shotgun wound to the chest and where it exited. Were there
Yes.
any other injuries associated with that? Please continue on.
Yes, so remember we had wadding enclosing pellets. The wadding actually got stuck, didn't completely exit and continue to fly out. It got stuck right underneath the skin of the left side of the chest, like close to the armpit area. And we have a photograph of that pink wadding that remained in the skin of the exit wound. From there, multiple of the shotgun pellets started going through like the left arm, okay, starting from the underside of the left arm. So the wadding terminated in the skin, and then pellets kind of went out and went through the left arm. Okay, so this is the left, remember this is his left side, his left shoulder, his left arm. And then we've got a bunch of exit pellet wounds on the left side of the arm, and some also a little bit on the back. So that, you can see this is going through, and then this is actually on the inside of the arm, and the exits are kind of on the left side. So,
Was there any stippling associated with this particular wound?
yes, okay, so there was stippling, and I'll draw that over here, okay? So when a projectile comes out of the barrel of a weapon, be it a shotgun, a handgun, an assault rifle, what propels that projectile, or we call, projectile out of the barrel of the gun. Okay, it's gunpowder, and gunpowder is basically ignited through the action of the shooter on the gun. And so gunpowder is basically burning and projects the projectile out of the barrel of the gun. A projectile can potentially travel a very long distance, like many feet, or yards, or long, depending on the projectile, until it hits something. Or if it doesn't hit anything, it could eventually use power and go to the ground. But the gunpowder that leaves the barrel of the weapon can travel not too far. It only travels about up to 3 feet, depending on the weapon. So in this case, we actually have some particles of like abrasions from particles of gunpowder. And this is called gunpowder stippling. Okay, so we have stippling, which indicates that this wound was fired at a fairly close range. We can't say exactly, but probably no more than 3 feet, because that's our standard. Could be anywhere from 2 to 3 feet. Interestingly enough, there were some markings on the edge of this kind of cookie cutter type of defect from the wadding going in that shows that some of the petals of the wadding are beginning to open. So this is very classic for a shotgun entrance wound, and at the autopsy shows that it went, after going through the underneath the left side of the chest, it went through the left arm.
All right. And let me ask you this, and before we look at some of the pictures, which are very graphic, is that correct?
Yes, it's just the nature of the beast.
If this particular injury, was it immediately fatal?
No, amazingly enough, this really, if that was all he sustained, he would have needed medical attention and some stitches and irrigation of the wound to clean it out, to make sure he doesn't get infected. But it actually did not pierce the chest or cause any internal bleeding. It did, however, cause a bruise or contusion of the left lung, and that's because there's a lot of energy associated with this, but didn't actually go through the ribs, but caused a contusion of the left lung. But he would have been expected to continue to be standing after this. It would not have sent him to the ground.
All right. If you could, there's a dowel stick over by your witness stand, and I'm going to make sure the jurors down here can see what you're talking about. If you could grab that for me real quick, and then we'll look at some of the pictures here.
Okay, what do you want me to do?
Well, I just wanted to show it to these jurors down here, just to make sure they can see what you were doing. And
Okay.
then if you could just stay standing for me, I'm going to give them an exhibit just for the real quick, Dr. Room. Careful to keep these pointed this way if you could, but I'm going to have you just look through states 478, 479, 480, 481, and 482 and see if you recognize those images.
Okay. So these are photographs.
And just real quick, just tell me if you recognize one.
Yes, I recognize all of them.
All right, and these images that were taken during the autopsy you conducted of Paul Murdaugh?
Yes.
All right, and would they assist you in explaining the injuries to the jury?
Yes.
All right, Your Honor, this time I've moved states 478, 479, 480, 481, and 482 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
Admitted without objection.
All right. Now, Dr. Ream, if you get the dowel stick and come around here to this screen, I'm going to put this first image up on the Elmo, and then if you could, we'll talk about these injuries and describe the jury.
Okay. So we can see it's not great focus here, but this is the entrance shotgun wound on the left side of the chest. His left nipple is over here, so it's the left side of the chest. And there is some stippling
And
around
Dr.
it.
Rumor, I apologize. but
Okay.
If you could come around and work this way so that all our jurors who
Oh,
are that way can
absolutely.
see.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right, so the shotgun wound is going in this direction. Remember, it exited that left side of the chest and then continued through the left arm. So that is a photograph of that wound, to the shotgun wound to the chest.
And we'll see some more close-up images here in a minute, but this is the entrance wound right here, is that correct?
Yes.
And then we have some injuries right here. Is that where those
Yes,
petals exited
that
into
is
the arm?
where the wadding, which is the plastic piece enclosing the pellets, terminated in the skin. It just didn't manage to get out. But all those pellets kind of got released from the wadding and went through the left arm.
I'm going to move, that was states 478 for the record. I'm going to move now to states 479. And what is this image?
Okay, so this is a more close-up view of the entrance wound. And you can see that it looks like there's little, almost squares or pegs sticking out of the edge. And that tells us that the wadding is starting to open. Because it opens up, it kind of opens up, there's petals. And this is a classic. I could put it in a book to say that this is consistent with a shotgun entrance wound. Okay, and we can see the dots around here. Those are from pieces of gunpowder that have basically impacted the skin because it's within a distance of 3 feet or so.
Moving now to states 480.
Okay, so usually when I take a photo, I don't want to go too close because then you won't be able to see where it is on the body. But here, this is recognized, this is the nipple, right? His left nipple. And we saw the entrance wound over here. And so here we have this is an exit wound where this pink wadding is basically stuck right there. And you can see these are the petals on the edge, and that's what gave that unique appearance to the entrance wound. Now, this is basically a cylinder that encloses lots of pellets. And then the pellets, here we start to actually have some of the pellets coming through the surrounding skin and then along the left side of the lateral side of the chest, kind of below the armpit area.
All right, and I'm going to show you what's been marked as states 111, already in evidence at this time. Do you recognize that?
Yes, so that is the wadding that I recovered at autopsy and took a picture of it before I recovered it, so that's the wadding that was from Paul's chest.
And just again, point out where that is in that image, please.
Yeah, so here it is. It's kind of peeking out through this big hole in the left side of the chest.
All right, let me move on to the next exhibit. I'm going to put up on the screen now states 481. And tell me what this image
Okay, so this is a photograph of the same wadding, but I'm taking it from a different angle, okay? So he's lying on an autopsy table, and I've moved his arm up to show the relationship of this wadding with the entrance pellet wounds on the underside, the underside of the left arm. And interestingly enough, a lot of times pellets just go through the skin, but here we have some abrasions around the skin, and it actually corresponds to abrasions. We normally don't have abrasions with an exit wound such as we have here, but the fact that we have abrasions on the underside of the left side of the chest, corresponding to the inside of the arm, indicates that his arm was down at the time of this injury.
So let me ask you about that. In your expert opinion, having done 5,500 autopsies, is there any way that Paul's hands were up when he suffered that shotgun wound to the chest that you've been talking about?
No, the autopsy answers that question, that his arm was down by his side at the time he sustained this injury.
And again, highlight the specific features that you observed that caused you to come to that expert
Okay,
opinion.
so let's just say hypothetically, if his arm was up, you see all of these abrasions around this exit defect and the abrasions around these pellet entrances. We wouldn't see that because those are caused by when these pellets and the wadding is pressing up against the skin is very elastic. So this is just kind of logic. I think you're all going to get this. It's kind of going to push the skin before it actually exits. The skin's going to stretch a lot. And if it hits up against the other portion of the skin, we have kind of abrasions, which are kind of scrapes on the skin around where it exited as well as where it entered. So these are sometimes called it's a shored exit wound. So the skin actually struck another area, and in fact it corresponds exactly. It's like a reflection. We can see this is reflected. This one is reflected over here. So if we can only get that kind of a mark if his arm is down. Now this is the kind of thing that it's the logical conclusion, and I'm confident that was the position of his arm at the time he was shot. And this is based on my training and more than 20 years of experience doing these cases.
All right, let me look at the next exhibit, which will be 482 for the record. And tell us what you see here, and also, if you could, how that also supports the conclusions you were just talking about to the jury.
Okay, so these are the exit pellet wounds on the outside of the arm in this area, right? So this is kind of like his armpit here. And we can see these are kind of these pellet exit wounds don't have the kind of abrasions around it. This is just kind of finding its way through the skin. And then this one is over here. So, and if the further the pellets travel, it kind of splays out. So after the pellets leave the wadding that is open, they're spread. So, but these are exit pellet wounds, and we don't have the kind of abrasions to suggest that his arm is pressed up against anything at the time that those pellets exited.
All right. One other thing as well is when talking about his arm being down, of course, the wadding stopped in that wound still in his chest, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's move on. Just give me 1 second here to get some other exhibits and show them to defense counsel. All right, Dr. Reamer, if I could get you maybe to stand that way just a little bit. I know we're in tight confines, and then we're trying to be as respectful as we can with these images. I'm going to show you now what's been marked as 483, states 484, states 485, 486, and 487. And just quickly tell me if you recognize those, and then I want to go back to the board before we talk about those pictures.
Yes, I recognize these.
All right, and those autopsy photographs that you took of
Yes.
Paul Murdaugh?
These are photographs that I took at the autopsy of Paul Murdaugh.
And would they assist you and explain to the jury the injuries that he suffered?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time I'd move states 483, 484, 485, 486, and 487 into evidence.
No objection, Your Honor.
They are admitted.
And Your Honor, I think all these exhibits, both he and I, 90% of them that we're introducing will be under seal.
Yes, sir, and for the record, these are under seal, and I provided the cover sheets to the court reporter. Every exhibit except for the poster board that we're doing, the state would request to be under seal because of their graphic nature. All right, Dr. Reamer, that was, and we'll come back a little bit more to that first injury, but there was a second shotgun injury as well, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and I'm going to go back to States 500, which is the poster board, and if you could, explain to and draw on this, diagram that second injury, and then we'll
Okay.
look at the pictures.
So there was a large shotgun wound defect to the top of his left shoulder. And there were lots of pellets recovered in the left shoulder area. And from there, it kind of just went across the top of the left shoulder and then went into the left side of the neck and face. Okay? And from there, his face actually was not destroyed from this, but there's a big exit wound on the top of the right side of the head. So this wound went from his left toward his right and upward, and with a slight front to back deviation. Now, what does that tell us? We don't really know. It's kind of going toward, it's sparing his face, it's going behind the face. Now, one thing that makes sense to me, how could that happen? If he was just standing, not everybody gets shot like standing like these diagrams, right? But if he was shot and his face was forward, it would have taken off a lot of his face. However, if he is turned toward the shooter, then it's going to go into the face here and go out towards the right back of the head. So to me, it makes sense that his head is turned to the left. Not necessarily completely, but partially turned to the left. And what happened here was an extremely severe, immediately fatal injury, because what it did was that after it went through the left side of the neck and face, our brain is basically held up through the skull, so we have bone at the top of the skull, but then we also have a bone that kind of holds up the brain. It went through the base of the skull, okay, which is kind of like in this area, the brain is up there, and this wound, actually, his brain was ejected out of the top of the right side of his head and actually arrived at the autopsy in a separate bucket. So the force of this wound actually pushed the brain out of his head. There was only just a small piece of brain remaining, and that's the brain stem that was attached to the spinal cord.
All right, and real quickly, going back to the first wound to the chest, if Paul was standing when he suffered that, could he have remained standing after suffering that wound?
Yes.
All right. The second wound, the one that starts in the shoulder and goes in here and then out the top of his head, what would have been the effect of that wound?
That would have been immediately fatal, and he would not have been standing. He would have just fallen to the ground.
All right, and would he have been capable at all of bracing his fall or anything like that with a catastrophic injury like that?
No, that's instantaneous death.
All right. Did you notice any abrasions on his face or anything like that?
Yes, he did have, and it's depicted in one of the photographs. He does have a kind of a scrape on his face, and very frequently scrapes on the face that it has a slight directionality. It's consistent with a terminal collapse. So if he's hitting the ground with some movement, there's frequently kind of a linear pattern. And, all of this really makes sense. Once you see these things, you can understand that if somebody's going to fall with, the force of their body, and they're going to hit their face on the ground, and we get some abrasions that correspond to that.
All right. And let me do this real quick. If you could grab that dowel stick for me, and I'm going to make sure the jurors down here had a chance to see what you've been drawing.
Okay.
So that's the shoulder right
Yeah.
there, and then...
Yeah, I should have made a red mark here. be consistent. This is the exit wound on the right side of the top of the head, and the brain came out of that exit.
You mentioned a little bit about being consistent with Paul kind of having his head tilted to one side. If you could use the dowel stick, maybe use me as an example and show me kind of what you're talking about. And you can position me however you want to.
Yeah, okay.
Let's go out here a little
So
bit. Yeah.
we start with like a different idea, okay, in order to understand how that's the case. So if a shotgun wound is entering the top of the left shoulder, and let's say his head is turned like that, it's going to go right through the face, right? But if his head is turned like that, it's going to spare the face and be able to go behind the face. So if somebody's just standing looking straight ahead, this most likely would have done a lot of damage to his face. But the fact that the face is remained intact tells me that his head was, I don't know, up and down, but his head was facing in the direction from where the shotgun was being fired.
And then the injury to the shoulder would have been where, if you just point with this?
Yes, so it's kind of on the top of the shoulder. This also did not injure his chest cavity. It kind of went through a lot of the skin and muscle and fat of the left shoulder. And there were a lot of pellets that were recovered from the left shoulder area as well as the head and neck.
And I'm going to show you very quickly what's been marked as States 110, and do you recognize this item already in evidence?
Yes, these are the pellets that I recovered from the left shoulder and head area.
All right. I'm going to go ahead, and if you could stay on that side so the jurors can see, and I'm going to...
This side?
Yeah, if you could work on this side so that the jurors down on that end can see, and I'm going to look at some of these. All right, and I'm going to show you first what's been marked as States 483, and can you tell me what's on this particular image, particularly as to some of the things you were just describing as to abrasion and things like that?
Yes. So we can see this is basically an abrasion is a fancy word for scrape. So there are scrapes on the right side of his face. And you can see they kind of have, you can kind of see that there's a little bit of linearity. So if he just fell completely flat, we might just get like, you know, dots, but if there's some movement, we get, it's kind of, he's hitting the ground and then moving it a little bit as his face hits, so we get this kind of vertical direction. And this is a very typical type of injury to the face that somebody might suffer from a terminal collapse. So after they sustain a fatal injury, what are they going to do? They're going to fall to the ground. Now, depending on the surface of, you know, if it's concrete or, you know, grass, we might get some. But this is very typical of, you know, I don't know what kind of surface it was, but a terminal collapse.
Okay. All right, if you would, with this image, and this would be States 484, please explain to the jury using this image some of the concepts that you've been describing to them.
So this is the top of his left shoulder, and this is the continuation of the ammunition through the left side of the lower face. And from there, it proceeded behind the face through the base of the skull and exited the right side of the top of the head and sort of toward the back of the right side of the top.
And those two sort of together, that's kind of what you described before when you had positioned my head in the manner in which you did.
Yeah, that's right. So my feet turn to the left like that. I think that makes the most logical sense, and forensic pathology is really logical. So when we look at these things, we have to think, well, how could this have happened? And, after it's not always immediately obvious, but, with some thought, we can come to these conclusions with confidence.
Turning now to States 485. This is just another perspective.
Yes, so this is the same injury. This is formed by a single piece of ammunition here that went through the top of the left shoulder. It tore it up, right? And then went into the left side of his face and neck. And some of these pellets also did a lot of damage in the neck because they kind of splay out as they go further. And some of them went actually through his airway and other structures of the neck, as well as continuing through the base of the skull and propelling the majority of the brain out the right side of the back of the head. Okay.
And now going to the sort of the end of that particular one, tell us what this image
Okay,
represents.
so, you can kind of see, it looks like this piece of his head, we're not really seeing the entire thing because his forehead is basically still intact, but you can appreciate at this point that, the contours of his skull are disrupted. And that's because there's a defect at the top of the skull, but not involving the forehead, so it's kind of in the back. So we know it started at the shoulder, it's been in the back, so his head may have been like that. Facing toward the left.
For the record, that was States 486, and finally States 487.
Okay, now this is, all right, so this is,
I can't,
Yes.
it's hard for me to see what I'm doing.
it's
but-
okay, yeah, so this is actually a photograph of the right side of, this is his, the face area, okay, and I know that because I usually, when I take a photograph of the number, I usually have it like right side up, okay? So this is the top of his head, and this is,
Dr. Reamer, I apologize.
no,
Let me
yeah.
Do it like that.
Yeah,
That might be a
that's
little
good,
better.
right. So now you can sort of see, this is the right side of his head, and it's horrible, I know. And there's a big defect there. And we can see the inside of the skull, but his face was spared, so.
All right, Dr. Reamer, if you would. That's all the images I have right now.
Excuse me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to the jury room for a few moments. Please not discuss the case.
You may now be seated.
You may bring the jury.
The jury is present, sir.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Yes, sir, Your Honor. May it please the court. Dr. Reamer, before we took a break, we were obviously discussing the very catastrophic injuries from that second shotgun wound to Paul, and that would have been immediately fatal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let me ask you this very quickly. Do you see any evidence of any defensive wounds on Paul?
No, I did not.
Can you describe quickly what a defensive wound is and then explain why you see none in this particular instance for this?
Yes, so a defensive wound is, sometimes somebody might sustain injuries that suggest that they had their hands or arms up while trying to defend themselves from from what is about to happen. And I don't see anything on his hands that would indicate, he had his hands up to his face in anticipation of the injury that was about to happen. So.
In your expert opinion, as you described it to the jury before, his arm was down for that first shot.
Yes, so that first shot, his arm was down, and I don't see any evidence of injury to his hands from the second wound.
And then that abrasion on his face is consistent with that second shot and him just having terminal
Right,
collapse.
so falling to the ground, hitting the right side of his face on the ground with a little bit of forward movement, so we got that kind of linearity, and that would be consistent with collapsing to the ground after, it's very frequently people, after sustaining any kinds of disabling injuries, if they're standing up, they're going to fall. It's just gravity. And so he fell, and he was face down at the time, so he had a scrape on the cheek, which is the surface of his body that impacted the ground.
What were toxicology results on Paul, if any?
Yes,
Anything that he might have had in his system?
Oh, yes. So every person that has an autopsy at MUSC, and everybody gets a full toxicology testing done. MUSC does not actually perform toxicology, but toxicology was sent to a toxicology lab that tests for any possible substances that may be in the blood, and the only thing he had in the blood at the time of his death was caffeine.
No alcohol or drugs?
No alcohol or drugs. It was negative.
Were you able to reach any conclusion about the order in which Paul suffered these shotgun blasts?
Okay. Well, in my opinion, based on my education and experience, the first shotgun wound, the initial shot was to the chest, following which he remained standing and sustained the other gunshot wound to the top of the left shoulder and head. If we think about it, well, is it possible that the other one was first? It just kind of defies logic, right? So if he got that one first on the left shoulder and through his head, we know that one sent him to the ground. So he fell to the ground, hit the right side of the face. How is he possibly going to get that one to the front of the chest? So it's just hard to imagine a scenario in which the shotgun wound to the head was first.
Let's move now, if we can, to Maggie Murdaugh. And you did her autopsy as well as you described to the jury, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
All right. And how many gunshot wounds, just very quickly, did you observe on Maggie?
So she sustained a total of 5 gunshot wounds from a minimum of 4 shots. So it could have been from 4 shots with 5 wounds or 5 separate shots. And I will explain once we do that. Go
I
through.
have what's been marked as States 501, and again, this is another diagram that would assist you in explaining these injuries.
Yes, so this is the female or the woman diagram, and and this is what I used to take notes while I performed the autopsy.
All right, if you would step down, please, and walk over here, and we'll do the same procedure with Maggie. You can start out by writing her name at the top, and then put the left and right on there too to aid us in understanding.
Okay.
All right, and let me do this just very quickly. I apologize. And going back to States 500, and this is Paul, is that correct?
Yes.
And you had an arrow right here kind of showing the direction of shot number 1, is
Yes.
that right? Can you do an arrow for shot number
Sure.
2, please? And Your Honor, this time I'd move States 500 into evidence for demonstrative purposes. So I'll move it into evidence.
Is he going to just use it for demonstrative purposes, or is he moving it into evidence?
I'll move it into evidence, Your Honor.
No objection.
To admit it without objection.
All right, going back to 501, this would be Maggie, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, if you could start to detail the injuries that you observed to Maggie and what is the most probable order based on your review of
Okay.
the evidence.
Well, first of all, this was a different weapon. It was not a shotgun with wadding and pellets. These injuries that Maggie sustained were they're completely consistent with an assault rifle. Okay, so it's a different weapon. And I'm going to go through the 5 wounds, and then we'll think about how I'll try to explain my opinion as to the lightweight order, just sort of like we figured out Paul's shotgun wound to the chest came first, but we'll do the same with hers. But she's got a few more wounds, so it could be a little bit more, require a little bit more logical thinking. Okay, so she had an entrance wound that was right over there. Okay, it's kind of right below the rib cage, not far from the middle of her set midline of her body. And that wound, okay, now we're going to remember, this is right and left. It's very easy to get the right-left situation confused, but that's going from front to back and downward, and there was an exit wound kind of like right down here. Okay, so it entered here. Okay, so we're in a kind of downward direction. It was actually 10 inches below where it entered, so it's pretty low. Down here was the exit wound, and on the way, that projectile, that bullet, went through the abdominal wall. That's like our muscle and all that. And then once it got inside the body, it went through mesentery, which is the supportive tissues of our intestines. So it went through mesentery, has all the blood vessels and lymphatics, all that stuff that supports our intestines. So the intestines take up a lot of room in there. Now it's continuing to go toward the back of her body, went through the pancreas, okay, which is kind of toward the back. And then as it's traveling left, it went through the left kidney and left iliac artery, which is a blood vessel that leads off the aorta before exiting the left side of the back.
All right. And let's go ahead. Can we do the second wound, and then we'll talk about both of those together in a second, if we could.
So we've got 2 that are basically completely to the front of the body, directly to the front. And there's another wound that's kind of on the front inside of the left thigh, kind of like over there, okay? And this one is also going from front to back and toward the left and downward. So these two shots follow a parallel path. They're both, so this is the left, okay, left leg, right, left thigh, and the exit wound was in the back of the left thigh, and this is a little bit too high, okay, I should, but it was lower
Put
down.
that X through the wrong one.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, so it's traveling in a downward direction and also with a kind of a slight right to left. So I'm going to draw an arrow to indicate the direction, okay? So that one's going like that, and then this one is also going in the same direction, downward toward the back.
And those, you said, followed kind of a parallel trajectory?
Yes, they had a relatively parallel trajectory. Another feature of each of these wounds is that, remember we talked about gunpowder stippling when somebody is shot at a relatively close range. Well, both of these wounds had gunpowder stippling around them, okay? All right.
And go ahead. And remind the jury what stippling indicates about probable distance from a firearm.
Yeah, so within 3 feet. You don't usually see it any more than 3 feet. Sometimes it's within 2 feet, but depending on the firearm, I can't say exactly, but it's somewhere in that range.
It's a fairly close range of parallel trajectories for these two
Right.
wounds.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
And they both exited the left side of the body. One was on the, this is her left leg. It's really easy to get turned around here. Okay, left thigh, and the other's on the left side of the lower back. And the one to the left leg actually just went through. It went through muscle and soft tissue. It didn't actually break a bone.
All right. If those two wounds, let's go ahead and do all the wounds. Can we go to the next wound that we have? And before we do that, was there a wound to the wrist in this particular instance?
Yes, there was a wound to the wrist, and it was on the left wrist. The entrance wound was somewhere around here. And, okay, so this is her left wrist, and then the exit wound was a little bit higher on the inside of the arm. So this is the kind of the hairy part, this part, and then the inside where there was an exit wound.
All right, and using my left hand, can you kind of point generally to the jury about the location of those?
Yeah, so kind of going in here and out there.
All right. All right, so that's 3 gunshot injuries at this point, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, now tell me about the fourth one, if you would,
Okay.
please.
So the fourth one was somewhat unusual because it's going in an upward direction through the body. Okay, there was an entrance wound on the underside of the left breast that exited like the top of the left breast. Okay, and from there we have some marks there's like bruising on the left side of the chest up here, the left clavicle, and that bullet continued through the underside of the left side of the face. Okay, so there's a wound kind of like over there, okay, and everything is kind of going up. So this was an exit, and then we have like a re-entrance, okay? So we have a series of defects. This is an entrance, an exit, and then the bullet continued through the left side of the face and lower ear area and into her head. Okay, now in addition to that.
Just real quick, those first 2 wounds that you described, the wound to the abdomen and the wound to the leg, and those were both to the front of the body, is that correct?
Correct.
And they both had a similar parallel trajectory, is that correct?
Yes.
Would either one of those wounds have been immediately fatal?
No.
All right. The wound you just described, how about the wound to the wrist? Would that have been immediately fatal?
No.
What about the wound that you just described that went in near the breast and then went into the head?
Yes, that would have been immediately fatal, because when it entered the left side of the face, it basically destroyed the brain.
And was there another gunshot injury, traumatic gunshot injury aside from that one?
Yes, but I'm going to, before I continue, I did want to mention that there was an abrasion, kind of a scrape, below that, which indicate below her left breast. So it indicates before it actually went through the left breast, it kind of scraped along the abdomen as it was going upward before it went into her head.
On the injury, the gunshot wound, the assault rifle wound to the abdomen, and the assault rifle wound to the leg, you said there was stippling there. Is that correct?
Yes, the other wounds did not have any stippling, so they were from further back.
The wrist wound had no stippling?
Correct.
And that wound that you just described going up into Maggie's head, that did not have any stippling either?
Correct.
All right. And you mentioned there's one more as well to her head, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, describe that to the jury using this chart, please, or this diagram.
Okay. So there was an entrance wound to the back of the head, okay, that was kind of like right over there, okay, and it's kind of near the base of her skull, and that was going downward. Okay, now this is like automatic rifle, it's a rifle ammunition, so it's not a single, cylindrical projectile that remains intact. These rifles, the projectiles fragment as they go through the body. That's one of the mechanisms by which they do enormous damage. Okay. Now this wound was going in a downward direction, and then we have lots of exit wounds on the right side of her upper back where all of those fragmented projectiles, fragments, exited. And this wound, it's in a clearly downward direction. It entered the back of her head, went through the back of the skull, and through the brainstem and cerebellum. Okay, so these are vital portions at the very bottom of the brain. But it did not enter into her chest. It continued just scraping along the top of the back. So we know this is going in a downward direction. So how do we reconcile? How do we make sense of a wound that's going upward and then another wound that's going downward? Okay, you'll recall this wound that went through her left breast and into the left side of her face injured her brain, right? She's not going to be standing anymore. Now, how would this even go upward? Okay, those first two shots, right? The one to her, or we'll say the one to her, the right side of her abdomen, that went, remember, through her pancreas and the left kidney. Kidney pain is usually very painful. We can imagine this did not immediately cause that, but she may have been bent over straight, and that puts her in a position, if someone's bending over, leaning over to get a gunshot wound that goes along, so when we look at her body in an upright position, and she's got a gunshot wound going upward, we know it's going upward because it ended in her head. Probably her body was bent over, and it may have been that she just sustained this very painful wound to her abdomen, not in addition to her thigh, and she was most likely, in my opinion, bent over or even possibly on the ground, but not completely lying flat, at the time, because then it would never have been able to go through the front, we have some skip areas here. So if she's bent over, we have some skin folds, we're going to get a skip, plus it went through the underside of the left breast, exited the top of the left breast, so that would indicate that her breast may have been sort of, like hanging down a little bit.
All right, so do you have that dowel stick anywhere? Unless if you would, just, again, use me, if you could, just describe some of the concepts you're talking about. And let's start with those first two shots to the abdomen, and then just kind of position me as we move on to the shots.
All right, so one wound.
Stand over here if you
Okay,
would, so we can-
absolutely. Okay. Well, now I have to kind of, I'll have to, yeah, I can't show this. Yeah, I'm going to show this. The entrance would be about there, right, top of the abdomen. And it went through the body, exiting on the left side of the lower back. And while it was in the body, went through the pancreas and the left kidney and a blood vessel nearby.
All right, and then the wound to the thigh.
Okay, the thigh was kind of on the front, but a little bit toward the inside area. And that exited lower down on the left thigh, in the back of the left thigh.
And one to the abdomen, that has been very painful.
Yes, I mean, kidney, if you ever knew anybody that had a kidney stones are some of the worst pain medicine. People who aren't get a kidney stone have to get on very high doses of morphine just to control the pain. Well, she had like projectiles, ammunition going through her left kidney. You can imagine that was a very painful wound and may have caused her to like fold over in pain.
So something like this.
Yes.
All right. And could it even been that she went to the ground and she's on her hands and knees, something like this?
Yes, that's also possible, and she could have had her head bent down or like sort of touching the ground at that point as well.
This shot, this one right here, that you described right there, is there any way at that point in time she could have been completely prone, flat on the ground like this?
No, because then how, a bullet's not just going to go up. So she has to at least have been, I can't say for sure, but it makes sense that after receiving those first two shots, she's going to be bent over at least, or possibly, even lower to the ground, enabling her to get a wound.
If you could, about
Yeah,
that over,
like
could
that,
you
that's
do this?
perfect. Okay, going through the front of the left side of the chest, and if your head is bent over even further, you can imagine it's going to go into the head like that. Okay, so when I first look at this, I'm like, what? It takes a little, but in retrospect, now that I've made sense of this, it all comes together. So,
So far at this point in time, we've talked about the abdomen and the thigh wound. In your opinion, are those two shots the first two shots she suffered?
yes, I think she was standing upright at the time, and then she only could have gotten the wound to the left side of, through the left side of the front into her head if she's horizontal but not completely on the ground. But after sustaining that wound, okay,
She could have been down on her hands and
she
knees,
could have
too.
been down on her hands and knees or just bent over, right? It went into her brain. She's going to fall to the ground completely, and that puts her in a position to get the gunshot wound to the back of the head. I can't really, you
right.
might not. You're too far away for that.
Sorry, I'm going to go over here, but show me that
Yeah,
last wound.
okay, so the last wound was going in a downward direction, entered here, and it's kind of, enough to fracture the skull and go through the back of the brain, it's like the brain stem, and then have just a bunch of exit wounds there. So that's, that actually is in kind of a downward direction. So we've got something going upward, we have something going downward, and it only makes sense that the one to the left side of the front occurred first, because if the one to the back of the head she basically was already had injury to the brain sufficient to have killed her. The one to the back of the head that went down was, an additional wound, but the one that entered the left side of the brain was already sufficient to have killed her.
If she had not suffered this wound right here, the one where she's hunched over her hands and knees, if she had not suffered that one, would this one to the back of the head also been immediately fatal?
Yes, either one of them would have been immediately fatal. That one went through the brain stem and the cerebellum. Those sections of the brain, their whole job is to keep us alive. They keep us breathing and set the cardiac rhythm, and without that, none of us would be here.
But in your opinion, abdomen and thigh is first. This one that went through her breast into her head is after that, and then this one is when she's prone on the ground to the back of the head.
Yes, so I
This is the
do
last
think
one.
this isn't something that I, immediately realized, but after thinking about it, how, this is gunshot wounds to one person, how do I make sense of this? And this is the most likely logical sequence of shots that she sustained. I also want to mention, remember we have this wound to the, so we have 4 we know about, right? We've got right side of the abdomen, left thigh, left, the left side of the head in the front, through her breast first, and then we have this last wound while she was prone on the ground, okay, to the back of the head. We also have this additional wound to the left wrist that exited a little bit higher. Now, is it possible that her arm was just somewhere and got shot? Yes. But remember, we know that she must have been in a lot of pain in her abdomen from that shot that went through the abdomen. And if she is bent over, where would her hand likely be? It makes sense she might be bent over with her hand right there. And so if her hand is bent, she's got her hand on her belly, the wound entering the left wrist could exit there before actually going up. So if she's got her hand on her belly, I don't know if that's actually happened, but that's why I described 5 individual gunshot wounds, but because the left wrist could have moved, it could have happened before another one of the shots.
And what you just described there with her wrist kind of close to her stomach after suffering that abdominal and thigh wound, that is consistent with the evidence what you just described, is that correct? That having her hand right there like
Yeah,
you described?
that it would be consistent. I can't say 100% that that's what happened, but that is a gunshot wound to the left wrist, and it may have been sustained while she had her hand on her abdomen, possibly.
Give me one sec. All right, Dr. Reamer, I'm going to show you some images, and if you could stand back that way, just so we can again try to protect these as much as we can. These again are very graphic, is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you, if you could, and I'm going to kind of give them to you this way. States 488, 489. 490, 491, double check, 492, 493, 495, 498, 499. And do you generally recognize those images?
Yes.
Those you took of Maggie Murdaugh?
Yes, these are photographs that I took of Maggie Murdaugh's wounds.
All right. And would those assist you in explaining these injuries to the jury?
Yes.
All right, Your Honor, at this time, I'd move into evidence states 488, 489, 490, 491, 492, 493, 495, 498, and 499.
No objection, Your Honor.
You're admitted.
Dr. Reamer, if you could grab the dial stick and come on down here, and I'm going to try to move through these as expeditiously as I can. Starting with 488, tell the jury.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so,
Just stand on this side real quick.
yeah,
So that,
oh, got it, okay, that's good. All right, so, this is a photo of, her left thigh. Okay, this is the knee area. And we can see this is kind of on the inside area, of the front of the left thigh. And we do have the stippling around it, which tells us that it was shot within a certain, like, relatively close range.
and we have the stippling as you've described. Moving on to
Okay.
stage 489. What is
All
this
right.
right here?
So you can kind of appreciate this is like the curve of her knees. This is the back of the left thigh where we have an exit wound.
Going on now to stage 490. What is this?
Okay, so this is the entrance wound on the right side of the front of the abdomen below the rib cage, close to the midline. And we do have stippling here. It's a little sparser and a little further spread. So that was also close enough, within 3 or so feet, to deposit the stippling, probably a little further back than the one to the left thigh, because there's a closer, there's more tightness of the stippling on the thigh. So if we think of it as kind of going outward, it covers a wider area and is more sparse on the right side of the abdomen.
Moving on to the next one. What is this right here?
Okay, so this is the exit wound to the left side of the lower back.
Just very quickly, you mentioned that there's stippling on both the abdomen and the thigh, but there's a little bit of difference in distance between the two. Is that correct?
Yes, a small amount. There's stippling on both, but the wound to the thigh is a more tighter, more closely packed bunch of stippling, and doesn't appear as further away from the actual defect. So that was a little bit closer than to the barrel of the gun was a little closer to her body than the one to the right side of the abdomen, but both of them were within 3 feet.
And those were the only two wounds that you observed with stippling of the ones that you've described? Is that
Yes.
All right. Going on now to this next 492. Tell us what this is, if you would, please.
Okay, so this is a wound to the left wrist, and we can see this is her left thumb, so it's kind of right over there, and it's going through the left wrist, exiting on the soft side of her left forearm.
And moving on now to 493. What does
Okay.
that look like?
Yes, so there it is, that's the exit wound, so she had the entrance wound to the part of her wrist near her thumb, and it's going through the left forearm area, exiting at an angle, right? We know it's kind of exiting at an angle because this defect is oblong, right? If it's going straight across, we would just have a hole, right? But if something's exiting at an angle, we have more of an oblong exit.
All right. Moving on to the next one, and again, this is graphic, but can you
Sorry, right.
tell me what this
Yeah.
is, and I'm going to move the picture down as you describe it, please.
Okay, so here's her belly button, just to give you a reference point. And this was that entrance wound on the right side of the abdomen. This is another injury that kind of grazed, kind of abraded the left side of the abdomen before going through her left breast.
And then moving down,
Yeah.
Is that
Okay.
sufficient? I can't really see.
Yeah, so it's fine. Okay, this is a very large destructive hole in the left side of her face, including parts of her left ear, and this makes sense to be a continuation of the one through the left breast. I was confident that this was all the result of a single bullet, single fired shot, and what we see over here is basically a bruise from, it didn't actually go into the left shoulder, but as it's coursing upward through the breast before it kind of goes, and if she's bent over, then it's going to bruise this clavicle area, right? That's that bone right here, before going into the left side of her lower face.
All right, moving on. Now, and I'm going to go out of order just a bit. I'm at 499, and can you explain?
All right, I'm having trouble seeing what this, oh yeah, okay, yeah, so at the time I did the autopsy, and I have a wound to the left wrist and through the forearm, and a wound that's going along the left side of the abdomen. I can't be certain, I can't say with an absolute certainty that her hand was up against her abdomen at the time that the gunshot wound to her torso was going upward. But if her hand was on her abdomen, which she may have had there after getting shot through the abdomen and bending over, this would be a perfect line through the, through the wrist, out the left forearm, and like continuing in an upward direction before fatally entering the left side of her head.
Is that an explanation for how the wrist and that gunshot could be related?
So I took a photo of the wrist and the scrape along the left side of her abdomen together because it occurred to me, based on my experience over decades, that this may have represented a single inflicted shot. Maybe the one to the wrist was a separate shot. And in my autopsy report, I described it as separate because unless I'm absolutely certain that it's from the same shot, I'm going to describe them separate. But I'm able to tell you, so we have 4 wounds to the body, and it may, 5 wounds, but if we count the left wrist as separate, but if the left wrist was connected to the other one, to one of the others, then it's there's only 4 shots to the body.
And then finally, states 498.
Okay, so this is also a very ugly shot, and this is the back of her head, and it's a routine matter. She had hair there, but it wasn't apparent what kind of a wound she had back there. There was blood, but I'll cut away the hair to display the entrance wound, and you can see how long it is. It's long. It's not just a hole going from back to front. It's going in a downward direction like that, and this ammunition breaks up into fragments, and we have like these fragments basically coursing along the top of her back, going through the skin and the fatty tissue beneath in her upper back. So, and this one, before it actually hit the back, it went through the skull at the back right side of the back of her head, as well as the brain stem and cerebellum.
Thank you, Dr. Reamer. We're almost done. If you could have a seat real quick, and we will conclude the examination. Your Honor, also at this time, I would move in to evidence states 501, which is the diagram that Dr. Reamer did of the injuries to Maggie.
Defense.
No objection.
They are admitted.
Dr. Reamer, you mentioned that there was a slight difference or a difference in the stippling between the abdominal and the thigh wound, and which one seemed to be a little bit farther away according to your review of the evidence?
Yes, the gunshot wound to the abdomen was slightly further away than the gunshot wound to the left thigh.
And that could be consistent with Maggie and the shooter changing their positions in relationship to one another.
Yeah, people aren't completely just standing still. It could be that the shooter was moving closer toward her or moving a little bit back or she could have been moving, or a combination of the two. So I don't know what happened there, but I do know that the barrel of the gun was closer at the time it struck her left thigh, because the stippling is more tight concentrically and doesn't cover as wide an area as the one to the right side of the abdomen.
You described the injuries to the front, and then the injury to the breast and to the head, and then the spinal injury to the back of the head. Could that be consistent with the shooter circling his victim?
Yeah, I think that only makes sense if there's some movement on the part of the shooter. We know the gunshot wound to the front of the body that's going up. If Maggie was bent over, either in air or on the ground, the shot would have been fired from behind her, right? From behind her, that's the only way it's going to go up and through the base of the chin area into her head, right? She's bent over. That's the way that it logically makes sense. Nobody's sitting on the floor, and you couldn't do that. And after that shot was sustained, the one that went through the front side, the vertical one, okay, it's vertical through her body, but most likely occurred while she was bent over, or then that's going to be an incapacitating shot because it went through her brain and caused her to fall to the ground. She's bent over, she gets that shot, she's going to fall face down, and then the last shot to the back of her head is going in the other direction. So that's going downward. So we have one going, so that only can occur if the wound to the left side of the front is somebody shooting from behind her, and then the gunshot wound to the back of the head is going downward while she's on the ground, indicating somebody's standing at at the top of her.
Was there a lot of blood accumulated in Maggie's abdomen?
Not that much. The thing about these wounds is there's so much tissue destruction that blood is just basically in all the tissues. So it's not like sometimes with even a small caliber bullet, there's a single clearly defined wound path, and I can take out blood from the abdomen. But in this case, there was so much tissue destruction. There was a lot of blood in the soft tissues, but not necessarily something I can scoop out and measure.
Did the lack of a lot of blood in the abdomen tell you anything about how rapidly these all occurred together?
Yeah, so if the wound stopped there to the abdomen and somebody walked away, she would have had more bleeding out of those tissues into the abdominal cavity.
In both Maggie and Paul, did you make any observations about their stomach contents?
Yes, so part of the autopsy, I'm not just looking at the wounds, I'm examining all of the internal organs, and this is how I knew it went through the pancreas and the kidney, because remember, I'm not just looking outside of the body. I have to do everything, look at all of the internal organs and dissect each one. And when examining the stomach, I will document the contents of the stomach, and they each had a lot of recently digested food fragments. So, they had a full stomach of food.
Were those stomach contents consistent with one another?
Yeah, they looked identical to each other. They were kind of gray tan, couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it may have included meat. I didn't see any corn or, green beans or anything like that. But whatever it was, they were identical to each other. And I believe she had 600 mLs, which is it's 450 mLs is a pound, so it's like almost 1.5 pounds of food, and he had 500 mLs, which is a little bit more than a pound. But they looked similar, like they may have shared a meal together.
You testified that there was no defensive wounds on Paul. Did you observe any defensive wounds on Maggie?
No, nothing that would indicate any kind of a defensive wound.
Did you observe any damage to her fingernails or anything that indicated that she had been in a fight with her attacker?
No. That's also part of the autopsy. I'm, in addition to collecting clippings from the fingernails, I look carefully to see sometimes there's a fingernail broken, sometimes there's obvious tissue or blood underneath fingernails, and she didn't have any evidence of, material visually evident underneath her fingernails.
What about her toxicology? Did she have anything in her system? Any drugs or alcohol?
She had caffeine only, the same as Paul, and no other alcohol, no alcohol or other drugs other than caffeine.
Dr. Reamer, in your professional expert opinion, what was the cause of death to a reasonable degree of medical certainty for Paul Murdaugh?
For Paul Murdaugh, shotgun wounds. Let me see what exactly I said. I said shotgun wounds to head and chest. Shotgun wounds of head and chest.
And what was the manner of death?
Manner of death is homicide, which means death at the hands of another.
And Dr. Reamer, in your expert opinion, what was, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, the cause of death for Maggie Murdaugh?
Maggie Murdaugh died of multiple gunshot wounds.
And what was the manner of death?
Manner of death is homicide, death at the hands of another.
Death at the hands of another. One final question. Did you recover any fragments from Maggie Murdaugh during your autopsy?
Yes. So this kind of ammunition breaks up into fragments. That's the nature of that ammunition, and so I recovered multiple fragments of projectiles.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted into evidence as States 112, and do you recognize that?
Yes, so those are fragments I've recovered from Maggie's autopsy.
Thank you, Dr. Reamer. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Your Honor, I'm going to have an extensive cross-examination. Do you want to begin that tonight or first thing in the morning?
You want to begin it in the morning?
I think so. I mean, it's 5:45. It could go easily to 7, and I don't think the jury would, at this point, like to stay here. I don't, but.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we will recess for the evening and start at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Please do not discuss the case. Doctor, you may step down. Please do not discuss your testimony with anyone. If everyone will be seated. As we anticipate other witnesses tomorrow, are there any matters that the court needs to consider overnight regarding any matters of controversy or in controversy or outstanding issues regarding any witness?
Shockingly no, Your Honor. Not on part of the defense.
Not on part of the state. The new information from GM we addressed this morning, and obviously the defense has that, and both sides are analyzing that, but I'm not, aside from that right now, I'm not aware of any specific issues the court needs to address.
The only query I will have, because we're again trying to arrange for people to fly in, and Monday is not going to be a court day, is does the Attorney General have any prognostication on when he might finish his case? I think with the GM material, it will affect it somewhat. I just don't know how much.
Your Honor, we're still on target for Wednesday. That GM material is just confirmatory of the timeline that both sides have had, and it's being incorporated into testimony. We have a custodian coming, which I don't imagine will be an extensive witness. We're still on target for Wednesday, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll be in recess to 9:30.
All right.